Welcome to Strategic Story Sharing. If you are here, it is probably because you are in a role where you are expected to share your story or your lived experience in some leadership capacity. We hope today's training can help provide some helpful guidance and spark good conversation. During today's training, we will talk about the following items. First, we will go through some simple introductions, and I will show you an example of a fun way to introduce yourself if you even have to share your story in a format that requires a presentation. Next, we will talk about the basics of strategic sharing, the definition, where it came from, why it's important, and some simple tips and tricks that will help you become a pro at sharing. Then we will discuss a concept called stoplight statements that can help you think through how to wordsmith parts of your story to make them most effective given the goal you have in mind. Next, we will talk about knowing your role and setting up your goal when an opportunity is presented for you to share your story. Then we will move along to discuss setting boundaries and limits and identifying risks and benefits when sharing. And finally, we will discuss common barriers to sharing effectively and some possible tricks that can help you.
Alrighty, so today I'm going to talk you through a fun way to introduce yourself whenever you're sharing your story. So as you'll see on the slide, there is about 5 pictures of myself. I also have my name, my job title, and then just some bullet points about myself. So when creating these, put your name, put your title, and then, you're a young person using your lived experience. So make sure that's the first bullet point as well. So as you can see, mine was, young professional with lived experience. Then I put that I am also a youth peer support specialist. And then I just start putting some interesting facts about myself. So I put son, brother, uncle, a dog dad. I'm also a friend. And then after I put just some of those other things that I am, I just put some interesting facts. So I put, enjoy eating hibachi, enjoy playing Animal Crossing and Mario Kart or Mario Party, workaholic. I love working. I work 3 jobs. And then one of the last things is, I enjoy going to Florida. So whenever you look at those pictures, there's a picture of me and my niece. And then I have a picture of me and 2 of my friends. I also have a picture of me, my mother, my sister, my niece, and my brother-in-law. I have a picture of my dog right in the middle, and then a picture of the last time I was in Florida. So whatever I'm putting over there as those interesting facts, I'm trying to make sure that I also have a picture to match that. And so this is just a fun way, kind of, lightens the mood whenever you're introducing yourself. Also gets to let the people, your audience, know some interesting facts about you.
Now we are going to hop into the first section of the training, Basics of Strategic Sharing. What is strategic sharing? As defined by Pathways RTC, strategic sharing is a way of sharing information, lived examples, or telling your stories in a way that is meaningful, effective, and safe. The link here on this slide is to the PDF version of the Strategic Sharing Workbook. Strategic sharing has not always been available to those of us who are sharing our lived experience as leaders. The concept of strategic sharing was created in the early 2000s by a young leader who had been asked to share his story repeatedly without any guidance of what to think about or expect. He shared his story far and wide, and soon enough, his story was available so publicly that a simple internet search made the most intimate details of his life common knowledge. At first, he thought nothing of this. But when he began to go on dates and his prospective partner would ask him questions about his specific experience that they had seen in an article or video somewhere, he realized that not everyone would be so friendly about this information. This and other painful experiences caused him to want to provide more guidance to other young people who were sharing their stories as leaders. So he teamed up with the folks at Pathways Regional Training Center, RTC, in Oregon to develop a workbook that could help other young people protect themselves and others while also using their powerful stories to create changes. This training is a supplement to the workbook, and we always suggest that you work through the workbook with a support person or as a team after you attend the training. The workbook is free, will be provided to you today, but can also be found online by Googling Strategic Sharing Workbook. So why does strategic sharing matter to us? Your story is powerful. Like the quote on this slide says, stories can heal and empower others, but this can only be accomplished if we are strategic with how we share. Story sharing is also one of the most effective ways we can learn, teach, and inspire each other. We are most effective with this when we are able to think through how and when we share. Your story can help you reach a goal you have, even if it's not conscious. When we share, we always have a reason. We will talk about our goals and sharing later today. Keep safety in mind. Story sharing in a strategic way also helps us to create a safe environment for ourselves and others. If we are overcome with emotion, it can be hard to stay effective when sharing. Similarly, if our audience or who we are sharing to is overcome with emotion, they may not be able to get what we are trying to give them when sharing our stories. In line with thinking about the safety pieces of strategic sharing, let's discuss some ways you can protect yourself while sharing. Most of today's information will help to think through safety for yourself and others. In this slide, there is some good information about protecting yourself that are not covered in other places in this presentation. Sometimes when sharing your story, it's possible that something will come up that makes you feel uncomfortable. If you feel you need a moment to gather your feelings, it's important to have the following: an identified and agreed upon contact or support person. This can be a family member, a friend, a colleague, a coach, or mentor. It is vital that you communicate with this person and they know when you might need to call them and what they can do to support you. Example, for Jesse, he usually leans on his tailored state team for this. He will tell the team when he is sharing and usually debriefs with at least one person from the team afterward. Depending on the event, he may ask them to be there too. Usually the team helps Jesse to identify ways he can improve next time or even reassure him that he was effective. A safe place to go when things get heavy ahead of time. This is especially important if you are sharing in an environment that is new to you or that is not your home. You may want to scope out an area ahead of sharing and identify a bathroom, an office, or somewhere private and safe to go that you can quickly go in case you need to break in order to calm down or ground yourself. General example. For Jesse, this is usually a small bathroom or his car if he has one with him. Strong awareness of personal triggers. This also includes an awareness of your own responses to trauma. This can look different for everyone. In preparation to share in most settings, you may be able to look on an agenda or ask a support person to help you think through what topics could be up for discussion. Anticipating what to expect ahead of time can help you get yourself in the right headspace to share effectively. An exit strategy. Exiting a situation can look different in each situation. If you are sharing one-on-one, you might ask for a bathroom break or something like that. If you are sharing in a group setting, like in a panel format, for example, you may need to rely on others to support you if you need to exit. Having nonverbal cues can help here, or even being willing to pass. Sometimes, when you're sharing your personal story, things can impact your audience in ways that can be hard to predict, challenging, and even unintentionally damaging. The best way to mitigate these possibilities is by encouraging people to take breaks if they need them. It is usually best to do this before you get too deep into sharing. This also works best for group settings, but if you're comfortable allowing this for one-on-one settings, you can also encourage that. Base what you say and how much you share on what your goal in sharing is. We will discuss the details of this in the next section. Utilize the stoplight statement throughout the process to decide how much to share. Again, this is in the next section. Please keep this in mind. Along with knowing how to keep yourself and your audience safe, it is also a good idea to keep some things in mind that you prepare before sharing your story. Here are some extra tips to keep in mind when thinking about sharing. If you are sharing in a group, Meet beforehand to work out turn order and other details. Preparedness and planning may seem mundane, but it is key to success. Sometimes it's okay to tell a secondhand story. Just do not use names or unique clues to give away a person's identity. If possible, notify the person before you share to make sure they are okay with it, especially if they are attending the event. Have a bio on hand: name, age, role, experience, and why you're passionate about the work you do. This can help you not think about it too much in the instance you are introducing yourself before sharing. You can keep this on a sticky note or on the notes in your phone so it is handy. One thing that is not often talked about in the strategic sharing space is self-care and how it applies to opening up and sharing your lived experience. It is normal that opening up about past experiences, both good and bad, can be exhausting. Think about what you can do before, during, and after sharing that can help you manage your wellness. Before an event, you can try your best to make sure you have a good night's rest, a light meal, and make sure you are hydrated. Anything you can do before you share can go a long way in keeping yourself comfortable and on target to reach your goal. During sharing, there are many things you can do to help yourself. Some strategies that are common are to have a small fidget, to move around in a room for in-person trainings, to have note cards, and to have water with you. We will talk about that in the last section of the training. After you share, it is important to debrief with somebody within 48 hours. You can discuss what went well, what could have gone better, and anything you wish to do differently next time. This will help you grow with your experience and provide an opportunity to celebrate a job well done. When following through or ending your time sharing, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. For the most part, you want to try to end on a positive or hopeful note. It is very easy when sharing your lived experience to unintentionally leave the audience feeling a loss of hope or with some feelings of despair, especially if you are sharing something that might have been traumatic. For this reason, you can talk about what life is like now or a goal that you are working towards in spite of the challenges that you might have faced in life towards the end of your sharing. General example: I may tell the audience about how my time in residential treatment only made my life worse for a period of time, but now that I am an adult, I have an incredibly rewarding job and I'm working to complete my education. Many times, when sharing your story, you may find your audience will compare you to others they know with similar circumstances. For this reason, it is important to both acknowledge that your experiences are unique, but also acknowledge the supports you have received to help you get to where you are now. This can help the audience to both draw connections to how they can help the person they are thinking of, but also how every person experiences situations a little differently. Slide 11. Especially if you have had a complex level of involvement with adversity, it can be easy to lose focus or go off topic when sharing. Something that can be very helpful in sharing examples in a way that is focused on your goal is the Rule of 3, which is commonly taught to public speakers as a way to focus their speech. The Rule of 3 provides a basic outline for sharing: an opening that highlights your intention or goal setting and sharing, no more than 3 personal examples to highlight your point, and a closing statement that highlights your original intention or goal. It is also worth noting that every situation is not one to be an open book in, especially for those of us who share our experiences in foster care or residential settings. We often are not used to privacy. In these settings, all it took was for someone to open our file and they could learn intimate details about personal lives without any sort of consent. These experiences often numb us to the reality that our privacy is a valuable and vital right in our own lives. Being an open book can also cause people to pass certain types of judgment on us without fully knowing the whole story. Although we share our stories to fight stigma, we must also be aware that stigma still exists and that people may stereotype us or judge us in other ways. This can cause them to be distracted and ultimately work against us in reaching our goal. It's okay to pick and choose what to share, when, and how. When deciding what to share, you can also think through these questions. How much time do I have? Who is my audience? What are my boundaries? Is it relevant to my goal? Does it have a resolution? We will talk more about this later on in this presentation. Keep in mind that it is easy to fall into the temptation of doing no prep work, just showing up and letting things flow when it's time to share. Unfortunately, not preparing is one of the main causes of rambling or freezing up. Put in the prep work where you can to ensure success. Take a moment to think of some social cues that help you know your sharing isn't effective.
So let's talk about social cues a little bit. For the folks that are watching this training online, if you all would take a few moments and just think about social cues that help you to know that maybe your sharing isn't being effective. And then we'll talk about that a little bit. I'm kind of thinking when maybe if someone turns away from you, or if they had a shocked face, what other social cues would tell you that they're not responding to what you're saying?
For me, I think what I've seen in the past is like eye contact is really bad, or they're down looking at their phone, maybe going through messages, or Snapchatting, or that's really, I don't look very hard because if I'm presenting, I'm trying to talk to the rest of the audience, but those are some things that come to my mind right away.
Yeah, I would say sometimes fidgeting around, even like with their arms crossed, they can kind of be that they're not really receiving what you're saying.
The stoplight statements are not in the strategic sharing workbook that we reference in this presentation. And in addition to the material that can be helpful in thinking through how to phrase your story when you share. When thinking about stoplight statements, we are truly thinking about a stoplight at a typical intersection. There are some examples in the next few slides, but for now, let's think through what these mean. In this way, a green light statement means that you are always good to hit go. These statements share basic information like a traffic light. A yellow light is typically fine to drive through, but you should slow down and use caution before proceeding. These statements provide more information and get slightly more specific than green light statements. Red light statements can be confusing. Red light statements are the ones that give a lot of information and use words that can evoke emotion. It is easy to assume you should avoid going through any red light statement, but it is not always the case. You always need to stop and look both ways at a red light, but sometimes you can make a right turn and proceed on your journey. In the same light, a red light statement can be used effectively, but it is important to stop and think before you use them. Let's look at some examples in the next few slides and we will come back to red light statements. Let's think about the general statement about feeling sick. A green light statement would be, I don't feel well. As you can see here, it's very basic and gets the point across effectively. A yellow light statement would be, my stomach hurts. Again, you can see the yellow light statement gets a little more specific. We can see here that it gives specific information and helps the listener to understand what part of you is causing you not to feel well. A red light statement would be, I think I'm going to vomit because my stomach hurts. Very specific, yes, but what word really makes this a red light statement and not a yellow light statement? Vomit. The word itself evokes emotion. Maybe you can see it, smell it, or feel the sensation yourself. Pretty gross, right? Red light statements do not always have to be gross, but using emotional changed words along with details can turn something into a red light statement situation really quickly. But sometimes that can be very effective. Using this example, you can think of a time when this red light statement would be the most effective way to communicate your point. Possibly you are a student in a classroom where the teacher is not hearing when you say you do not feel well and need to go to the bathroom. Using the red light statement might be more effective. Let's talk about an example where someone talks about their lived experience. A green light statement would be, I had a challenging childhood. This green light statement allows the listener to convey childhood challenges, but does not specifically say the type of challenge. A yellow light statement would be, I experienced an abusive childhood. With this yellow light statement, the listener can understand the type of challenge the speaker faced in childhood. A red light statement would include details such as age and the type of abuse. This example gives us an opportunity to think about vocabulary, especially as we talk about trauma. Many survivors of trauma have gotten away from using terms that may evoke a trauma response out of others who have also experienced similar trauma. For example, words like sexual assault or SA have replaced outdated terms that can evoke more of a detailed trauma response. It is important to be up to speed on the most appropriate terms to use when presenting your story to others. You never know who you may be speaking to and what they have been through. Vocabulary always matters, and it is your responsibility to be willing to learn new ways to talk about your own truth in ways that is effective and safe for others to hear.
So let's talk about some red light statements and how they can be turned into green light statements. Do we have some examples to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share first. So one that I can think of is, starting with the red light, is my dad cheated on my mom with another lady whenever I was a child, and had a child, and so she ruined my childhood. And then my yellow light statement would say that someone ruined my childhood. And then my green light statement would be my parents divorced.
So my example of a red light statement would be, I didn't get any rest because I was up all night having nightmares about being murdered. And a yellow light statement could be, I didn't get any rest. And a red light statement, green light statement could be, I'm tired.
Let's think about how this concept applies when we are thinking about sharing stories that may involve other people or stories that are secondhand. First, you should always take into consideration and get consent of others when you are sharing a story that may involve them, especially if you are sharing your story in a small community that you or other people in your story are a part of. It can be very easy to out someone unintentionally. Most of the time with these stories, you should stick with green light statements. Very rarely would it be okay to use yellow or red light statements, as it may identify somebody. Another thing you can do before you share these types of stories is to utilize a qualifying statement like, you may know the people I am talking about, but for protection, I ask that you keep this information here for the purpose of learning. It is very vital that the only time you use secondhand stories are in goals to educate, advocate, or build empathy for the person the story is about. Telling a story in a way that can make a person who is not there share it directly themselves be seen in a bad light can damage your credibility and more.
Now that we have talked about some basic tools to use in strategic sharing, let's talk about how being aware of your role when you are sharing, as well as having a solid goal, can help you figure out what to say and how. In the Youth and Family Peer Support Core Competency Training, we talk about the many roles we have as peer support specialists. Peer support specialists are people with lived experience with a behavioral health challenge. Just like peer supports, those of us who share as leaders wear our roles like hats. Have you ever heard someone say, I am wearing multiple hats? Just like the saying, you can be in multiple roles at one time. The main hats we wear when sharing our story are listed here. This is not an exclusive list, but it captures the majority of the hats we wear. Someone sharing with their recruiter hat on may share their story as a way to recruit someone to some sort of movement or mission. For example, I could share my story to get another young person to join the youth council or to attend a drop-in center. If someone is sharing their story as an advocate for themselves and/or others, they may share their lived experience as a way to show public or outward support of some sort of cause or a change that would be made. If someone is sharing their story as an advocate for themselves and/or others, they may share their lived experience as a way to show public or outward support of some sort of cause or a change that should be made. This can be as large as legislative change, but also as simple as speaking up about your experience to decision makers within a program or agency. At the same time that you need to be aware of your role or hat you are wearing, it is also important to have a solid goal in order to craft the way you share. A common mistake that is made when first sharing your story is sharing simply for the sake of sharing. This can be attributed to well-intended encouragement from others to start sharing our story widely. These encouragements are correct that our stories have a list of power, but if we do not learn how to focus that power, we can miss our target and become ineffective. Identifying your goal in sharing is vital every time before you share. A simple question to ask yourself in identifying your goal is, what outcome do I ultimately want by sharing my story? If it is difficult to answer this question, you can also look to the hat you are wearing to help identify your goal. Do you need to educate, advocate, or ask for something to change? Once you have your goal in mind, you can start to think of the pieces of your story that can help you communicate your ask and get the outcome you want. Adding it all together. Example, role, educator and advocate. Goal, motivate DCBS leaders to create access to 16 to 18-year-olds in care to obtain their driver's license. What to share. 1. What I missed out on by not having my driver's permit or license before moving off to college. 2. How my life changed after overcoming barriers to get my driver's license. Take a minute or two and think about the following. When was the last time you shared your story? What hat were you wearing? Did you have a goal in mind? How did you think it went?
So let's take a moment to think about the last time that maybe you shared your story. So if you are joining us for this training online, give some thought to when you shared your story last. And that could be as a leader or at work or even in your personal life. So we'll talk about maybe the last time you shared your story, Jesse. When was that? When was the last time?
So the last time that I shared part of my story probably would have been back in March or April. I was at one of the drop-in centers talking to some of the staff before the youth came in for open access hours. And we all just sat down and we started talking about some of our lived experiences that we had went through, especially talking about losing parents at a young age and some of the anger, resentment that you have with that. And so that was probably the last time that I shared my story.
What hat were you wearing at the time?
So at the time, the hat that I was wearing was either an advocacy hat or that, empathy seeker hat. A part of me was, wanting someone to listen to hear some of the things that I had went through, but also at the same time, I wanted to be able to use some of my experience to help someone else as well. If they hadn't experienced the same thing 100%, or to see, if they had experienced the same thing.
So what I'm hearing too is that was kind of your goal that you had in mind.
Yeah, that really ultimately was the goal, was to share some of the experiences that I've went through, some of the anger, some of the resentment, some of the things that I didn't get to have that closure with a parent. And while having those conversations, there was ultimately a lot of other people who had a lot of closure, that they didn't get to have either. And they had some resentment and talked about, that actually that's natural to have that resentment. In some ways, they've been working through it.
And then how do you think it went?
I think overall it went really well. And for me too, I ended up learning some things about people that I didn't know that they had lost their parents, and it really made a connection with some of the other staff at the drop-in center and also some of the young adults that were there at the drop-in center before the open access hours for, those 16 to 18-year-olds. So.
Thank you.
Sometimes the possibilities of what you can share feel overwhelming. As we have already stated, our stories have a lot of power, and as the person who owns our stories, it is important that we set boundaries and limits and learn to weigh risks and benefits in thinking about sharing. In this presentation, we use another driving reference to discuss how we can relate to boundaries and limits in sharing our experiences. Think of this concept like a parking lot. In a parking lot, we all have lines that indicate where we should park. Your boundaries are represented by the yellow lines of your parking spot. Your limits are how close you are willing to get to that line. Maybe you are most comfortable right in the center. In this way, you tend to not take a lot of risks in sharing your story. And the closer you are to the line, or crossing your boundary, you start to feel uncomfortable. Maybe you are okay with going right up to the line. This may be because you need to get to where you are going quickly, or that the car next to you has crossed your boundaries. In this instance, you may feel it is appropriate to push your limits. Most of us can agree that it is rarely ever a good idea to cross the yellow line completely, but sometimes it is not so clear. For certain boundaries, there are very clear and bright boundaries not to cross. Naming names in your story or telling others stories without their permission is a clear boundary not to cross. This can damage your credibility by making it seem like you are disregarding others' boundaries or bad-mouthing them. Giving false information or misinformation is also a big boundary not to cross when sharing our stories. This can happen when you are not feeling heard, and the temptation to exaggerate can be strong in these circumstances. Eventually, misinformation can damage your credibility and reputation, and may even cause a general mistrust of all people with lived experience. Bad-mouthing is also a slippery slope when talking about negative experiences with adversity, especially if we hope to partner for changes. Bad-mouthing can cause us to be seen as having an us against them mindset, and it is not always conducive to constructive conversation about what needs to be changed. In the same light, we must certainly be willing to be real about the adversity we have faced. We just need to make sure we are being constructive when doing so. What makes criticism constructive? It's simple, really. To be constructive, we must provide a solution or communicate our willingness to be part of finding the solution. Some boundaries are a little less clear and may vary given different types of circumstances. We call these gray areas because they are not black and white, but a combination of both. Like setting boundaries, weighing the risks and benefits to sharing is a crucial part of the process of staying effective and choosing what you share.
Good morning, T. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. All right, so today we're going to go over the benefits and risk section out of the strategic sharing workbook. So that will be exercise 2. And did you go ahead and get that finished today?
Yes, I did.
So basically the parts that you really focused on in here was benefits of sharing, and that was split into 3 categories: the education, positive change promotion, and personal growth and development. And then the 4 different categories in the risk of sharing was personal relationships, professional relationships, stigma exposure, and emotional well-being.
Yep.
So those will really be basically all the answers to your questions today as we go through this exercise. So we'll go ahead and get started off with number 1 whenever you're ready. It should be on page 24. Looks like you skipped. There we go. All right, so the following scenarios will provide you with the opportunity to test your knowledge of the risk and benefits of sharing your stories. There are multiple right answers, so we are going to ask you to explain your answers in the space provided, and if you're having trouble with a question, we'll refer back to the answer key in the back for an example. And then at the end of these questions, you'll have the opportunity to identify some of the risks and benefits that you have seen or that you think you will see in your advocacy work. So that will be at the very end after we go through these different scenarios.
Okay.
So the first scenario is Peter is in foster care and is about to attend his case planning meeting. He really wants to go on a school trip to a leadership camp, but he doesn't have the funds to pay for it. He also knows that his biological mother doesn't have the money to spare. He is concerned that asking his foster parents for money will hurt his mother's feelings. He is torn because he knows that this trip would be a great experience for him, but he doesn't want to upset anyone. Now he has to decide whether or not to bring this issue up with his case planning team. So name 1 benefit and 1 risk that Peter should take into consideration. So what is 1 benefit?
Well, I put personal growth and development.
Okay, yeah, I think that's correct. Definitely, he even states that it would be a learning opportunity for him to go, and so he'd be learning new things, and that is a personal growth for him. So great. And what about a risk?
That it might have a negative impact on his mom and his personal relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so number 2, the second scenario is Ashley has been asked to speak at a congressional briefing. The briefing is addressing issues around suicide and substance abuse. Ashley has a very moving story about her struggles with substance abuse and thoughts of suicide, and how mental health services are helping her cope and manage her needs. Ashley has some uneasy feelings about speaking at this event. Please name 1 benefit and 1 risk that Ashley should measure before doing this event. So what is one benefit?
Education
Education, yes.
and positive change promotion.
Okay.
So it's an opportunity for her to bring about change to people who might not know.
Absolutely. She gets to use her lived experience, and her struggles that she experienced to educate. So yeah, absolutely. And what about a risk?
Emotional well-being and professional and personal relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say, I think it'd be really, really hard for her to be able to share that, her own story about some of those things that she went through. If she doesn't have the right support, her well-being emotionally is not gonna be probably very well. All right, so you've done great so far answering all these questions. So we're on the last two now, and these are really just all about you. Instead of these scenarios, these last two questions are all about you. So on number 5, it says, let's take a moment to identify some of the risk factors you have seen or think that you will see when you're doing your advocacy. So if you don't mind to share some of those.
Okay. I feel like one of the main risk factors would be my personal relationships, because a lot of my lived experiences with my personal family members and people who are really close to me, and some of those things I've never even told people about. So
Yeah, completely understand that. I have an uncle that used to work in the same field, and so whenever I shared my story, I had to be very cautious of it first to make sure that I didn't identify anything or also, affect any relationships like that as well. So completely understand that. All right, and then number 6, what are some steps that you can take to address these risk factors, or that main risk factor?
I put that I can start by being honest, and tell my lived experience, but also try not to bring any negative or tarnish those people in my life, but just giving my perspective on things and what it did to me.
Absolutely. And do you have a person identified to be your support person whenever you're sharing your story? Someone that you can go to, after to debrief, or maybe you can talk to before you share your story?
I do.
I think that would be really beneficial to make sure, that you're addressing your risk factors the correct way, having that person identified. So, all right. Well, thank you. And, we'll work on the next section next time we meet.
Okay. Thank you.
Weighing your risks and benefits can be sorted out by asking yourself these simple questions. You have been asked to share your story. Should you? What role do you need to be in to be effective? What is my goal? What is the benefit? What risks may pop up while sharing? Have I shared this part of my story before? You want to do this with every time you share. It takes practice, but eventually this becomes second nature. You can also write out a pros and cons list. If you would like practice, pages 16 through 27 in the Strategic Sharing Workbook offers a great worksheet. Understanding your risks and benefits, as well as your boundaries and limits, will help you to become a pro at sharing. These things can take time and practice, so go easy on yourself as you embark on your sharing journey. Here are some extra tips for success. It's also a good idea to share anything that you do not talk about a lot with a trusted person or support person before you share it publicly. This will provide an opportunity for you to get some practice, learn what you may experience emotionally in the public setting, and come up with strategies to mitigate any challenges. Be prepared to answer or pass on anything that may be asked of you, and discuss your limits with support people, especially those who may be in power in the setting you are sharing in. For example, if I am speaking on a panel, I may let the moderator know the things that are off limits for me to talk about. It is more than okay to pass on opportunities to share. There can be great pressure, especially early on, to take every opportunity you can get. The truth is, there are a variety of opportunities to share your story. Passing on one now does not damage your ability to share again in the future. In fact, it can communicate leadership readiness, and that is a great thing. Finally, let's talk about common barriers in sharing. Take a few moments to think about what your main barrier might be when sharing.
So let's talk about some barriers to sharing. So for the folks that are joining us for this training online, maybe take a few moments, think about some barriers to sharing for yourself or for other people. And then maybe we'll talk about some examples of what keeps people from sharing.
Yeah. So for me personally, you know, one of my main barriers whenever I do share is having that thought of like, you know, someone had it worse than I did. And so, you know, whenever I am sharing, also keeping in mind that, you know, my lived experience is valid and that I shouldn't hold anything back or be afraid to share what I've experienced just because it might be different than what someone else or someone else maybe did have it, you know, harder or what I would think would be harder. So that really is like my main barrier. And I think that with a lot of young people that I've talked to and worked with, like that is their one of their barriers too, is that they're always afraid, you know, that they don't want someone to think that they think theirs is worse than someone else's.
The most typical barriers to being an effective sharer are struggling to find or make preparation time, knowing what, when, and how much to share, or being an oversharer or undersharer in general. Question for trainees: would you identify yourself as an oversharer or an undersharer? For trainer: I am personally an undersharer. I tend to share this way because I typically don't trust telling people my personal life. The next few slides talk about oversharing and undersharing in more detail. Maybe you can find something that resonates with you. Oversharing can be caused by a variety of things. In general, a lack of preparation can lead to the need to ramble or process out loud in order to get your point across. Also, a general and deep need to feel heard can cause oversharing. A need to feel heard can be developed early on in life when experiencing oppression or emotional trauma. The opportunity to be heard may feel exciting or even intoxicating and compel you to share more than necessary. Like the need to feel heard, an underdeveloped sense of boundaries can also be contributed to certain types of experiences early on in life. For example, if you did not have any right to privacy as an adolescent, you may be more apt to have an open book mentality or overshare unintentionally. Also, certain types of behavioral health challenges can contribute to a lack of social awareness and therefore may contribute to oversharing. Although many of these barriers cannot be controlled, there are things that can help. If you are having to share your story at length, visual aids can help you stay on topic or give you a roadmap. This is why many people use PowerPoints in presentations, but you can also draw a visual map on paper to help you to stay focused. Having a structure in general can really help someone who tends to share too much. Like we talked about earlier, using the rule of threes can be a good starting point for getting structure. Consider practicing how you share and timing yourself. Consider how you can gauge how much you are sharing versus how much you are listening in one-on-one settings. Depending on your role, you might be listening more than you are sharing. Be aware of the body language of those around you. Like most other strategic sharing concepts, practice and experience will help you improve. Undersharing is, in general, caused by a few different things. Certain types of anxiety can make it difficult to process quickly, thus you may feel like it's hard to speak on your feet. You may also struggle to see the value in your story. Given our diverse experiences, we can trick ourselves into comparing our stories to others. Maybe you feel like you had it better, or do not have anything relevant or big to add. Fear of vulnerability can be born out of similar emotional traumas that cause the oversharer to feel the need to be heard. Maybe you have had bad experiences with vulnerability, but vulnerability and authenticity, when used in the correct way, are powerful tools. Lack of preparedness can also leave you feeling stumped or at a loss for words, thus cause you to share less than necessary or nothing at all. Not having explored your story thoroughly can contribute to not fully seeing the value in your story or know how to share the things that you have been through in a way that helps meet a goal. Again, these may be barriers, but there are certainly things that can help an undersharer to start to share more. For undersharers, using the public speaking technique called the BRIEF method can help quite a bit. BRIEF is an acronym that stands for Believe, Rehearse, interesting, edit, fun, and can be found on YouTube if you wish to learn more. Confidence building exercises like affirmations, listening to music that empowers you, challenging your inner critic, and taking on an alter ego before sharing can go a long way as well. If you struggle to know what to share, consider doing something to help yourself explore your life story a little bit more. Exercises like milestones, also known as story beading, can help. This is an exercise where you make a bracelet or necklace using beads to represent big events in your life in order. Each bead you pick can represent visually what the milestone or big life event was about. You can also journal about your life or create a PowerPoint with pictures that represent the phases of your life: baby, toddler, elementary school, middle school, high school, young adult, etc. If you get anxiety while speaking, it can cause some physical symptoms that add to the distraction you may be facing. Maybe you get hot and start to sweat. Holding a cold bottle of water or even refrigerating some clay or Play-Doh to fidget with while speaking can cool your body temperature down and help to keep you comfortable. Maybe you start to breathe faster or lose track of your breathing. Taking a few seconds of silence to slow down your breath can help in between your sentences. Maybe you get a dry mouth. Keeping water on hand and taking a moment to take a sip can also help. Again, like most other strategic sharing concepts, practice and experience will help you improve. Most importantly, as leaders, we aim for improvement and not perfection. For more information, please contact Jessie Dillow at jessie@kentuckypartnership.org. Thank you for your time today and for attending Strategic Sharing.